My concern is whether this increase in the number of degree holders will affect the value of our degree. Like, will it maybe dilute the significance? And will it also make it harder for us to differentiate ourselves from, let's say, diploma holders and so on? And my second question is also related. It has to do with the value of specific degrees. How does the ministry or perhaps the different universities ensure that the number of students taking a particular course is actually in sync with market demand?
So to your question about, on the values of a degree, whether you'll be diluted and so on, I would say first, the most important thing to me is, and I'll touch a little bit on that, which is what sort of qualities would enable our people to succeed? I think there's a question from our friend from Harvard about this, and I'll touch on it in my second part. But I do think that the university degree really goes beyond a paper qualification. I think there's a great difference between whether you are getting a university grade, a university degree, or whether you are getting a university education. And I'll say that applies to our schools. Are we getting an education or are we getting grades? Now, I'm not against grades. I think getting good grades is a way of, encouraging excellence. And we must encourage excellence. I'm not against competition because, for instance, I encourage schools to play sports and play vigorously, play fairly, because it inculcates certain values in our students. It teaches students, that to train hard, to work hard, to show teamwork, to show care for each other, work together as a team, compete, and if you lose graciously. If you win, that's great. You celebrate the teamwork, and if you lose, spring back. So I think competition is not a bad thing. Grades are not a bad thing. But as in all things, understanding the purpose behind it is very important. Because if you're just competing for the sake of the grades, then I think the value of an education is lost. And I would say that in case of, certainly in a university, apart from acquiring deep knowledge in particular subjects, a lot of that has got to do with, first and foremost, I believe, really a learning of values and character development.
I'd just like to push you further on this issue about the vast inequality and social stratification in Singapore. You mentioned in your speech that last time in your generation the priority was to put food on the table. But in Singapore today, there is still a lot of people who struggle to put food on the table. If we look at the Straits Times Pocket Money Fund, their purpose is to provide pocket money for children to buy food during recess and for other things. And I was involved in the NIE study to go down to one of the neighborhood schools, that, as you mentioned, to observe how they celebrate National Day. And so the neighborhood school teacher was telling me that they are a neighborhood school and there are lots of disadvantaged children. And so during National Day, they asked the students to wear red top and white bottoms, like shorts or skirts, to signify, hey, we are all in this together. But there were lots of, not lots, maybe quite a few children who were not able to afford to buy a red top and a white bottom. And so they had to come to school in a normal school uniform, and because their parents could not afford a red top and a white bottom. So my question to you is, moving away from just the education's perspective, from a cabinet level, whole of government perspective, what is the clear thinking, or is there a clear thinking by the government on this inequality and social stratification issue? Thank you.
Well, first, let me say that I shall not preempt what DPM Tharman would say at his budget speech as to what the government would do. So I leave that to DPM Tharman to talk about it. But I think in terms of whether this is an issue and how we can bring up. Now, the phenomenon of wage growth in the global economy, and Singapore being a very much a part of it, it's really very much a global problem. And let me touch on it later in my second part of what I want to talk about jobs, and about the challenges to many workers. Yeah, but so let me touch on that in my second part. And I think going forward, if I were to sum up what we need to do in terms of how we can continue to have that success, is that it has to be a Singaporeans plus strategy. What do I mean by that? First, in every of these key areas, you need a strong Singaporean core. Very much like what the CEO was talking, that the Singaporean wants to be home, because Singapore is home. He wants to be back there. He's a PhD, he's an R&D engineer. And because of the Singaporean core, that activity is in Singapore. And you can multiply that across many different areas, whether it is in banking and finance, in technology, or in law and so on. Right? I understand that you all had a session about the legal sector in Singapore and how we can grow the legal sector. And I do think that Singapore can play a very important regional role in this, and something that we should develop. So first, a strong Singaporean core. I'm happy that Lawrence's MOS Lawrence Committee is making good progress on the expansion of university pathway. Don't worry, you will not dilute the quality of degree. We'll have to do it very carefully. We'll have to do it in a very differentiated way. Whatever new things that we do, just as when SMU started, it had to be different from NUS and NTU. SUTD has to be different. So whatever new pathways we create will be different and will allow the graduates to differentiate themselves. Now, at the same time, we are exploring ways to develop our Singaporean talent, and I would touch on this in a few weeks when details are ready, because I think developing that core allows us to create many more opportunities for many people, including people in the lower income group. Right? It is, once you are able to anchor and create vibrancy in the economy, I think we're in a better position to deal with the competition on work. Because if you look at unemployment in many countries, it is a severe problem. And I hope that the global leaders get together to look at this problem, because the human costs are very high. But as a small country, we do what we can to contribute our expertise, contribute our experience to help others. But at the same time, we do what we can to create opportunities for Singaporeans at whatever level.
So I've got a question.
Thank you.
Is that how much of emphasis is placed by the Singapore education system on being street smart? A lot of students are geared towards being book smart, but in terms of street smart, like when you say you go to Middle East, it's not so much of how much you follow the protocols and follow the rules that you've studied, but it's more of how you, in that situation, you're able to better manage the situation. So are there being any emphasis being placed on this, being street smart?
When you talk about street smart, some people think of street smart as being, we all think of street smart in many different ways. Right? But if you think about, say, resourcefulness, for instance, as one of the so-called street smart skills, being able to take initiative, I will agree with you that, indeed, the education system can develop those qualities, can help students to prepare and say, if you, instead of being spoon-fed, you have to go and look for your own things, and you just learn how to do things. I've seen in schools, for instance, providing many opportunities for leadership. SMU is one of them. I think you do quite a bit of that. But even in secondary schools, I see some of the schools doing that. I just visited a so-called neighborhood school. They organize a camp every year for students to one of the national parks in Malaysia. And they make sure that it is the Sec 3 kids who organize it for the Sec 1 kids. And I said, you do it completely without, some vendors' help. We say, no. I say, why? We want to teach them to be resourceful. And we want to teach the Sec 3 kids the value of looking after, the important value of looking after your peers, looking after someone your junior, and being able to go out in the wild and, do all these things. And I want the Sec 1 kid to learn how is it that they can emulate what the Sec 3 students are doing, so that when it comes to their turn, they can play that leadership role and they can be resourceful and they can take care of them. So I think there are opportunities of doing that. But what I'm saying also is that it should not be left entirely to the schools. Parents play a very important role. I asked the schools, I said, does everyone go for this? And they say no. Some parents say, no, my child cannot go for a camp like that. It's too dangerous. So if a parent say they can't go for this, then how do you develop these qualities in them?